Hello again, everyone. This is Dr. Zizzi. On a somewhat sunny day in Morgantown. Hope you all are doing well. I'd like to take you through the lecture for Unit 3 in our Sport and Exercise Psych class, 383. And this particular unit will apply to everyone pretty much, because regardless of whether you're an athlete or you're a recreational exerciser or you're sedentary, exercise has the potential to impact your mental health regardless of whether you're fit or not. Now, of course, if you're a regular exerciser or you're an athlete, you probably reap the stress management benefits quite a bit from this particular benefit of exercise. And so we're going to have a look at why this occurs, what some of the key benefits are, and how exercise can be used both in prevention of mental health issues and also for treatment. So we're going to get going. Now, before we do that, I want to show you really one interesting video that's an example of some of the stuff we were talking about in the last unit. A way to change the environment to change behavior. So sometimes in psychology we get locked up in changing attitudes, helping people be more motivated, and really the whole issue of personal responsibility. But I want to show you a simple example from Europe in which they have altered the environment in a subway station. So if you've ever been in a subway station or a mall, there's often options to take an escalator or to take stairs right beside each other. And so in your book they talked about prompts or point of decision prompts. And so at the point of decision of taking the stairs or taking the escalator, you provide some information or you provide a sign or something like that. And this is probably one of the most creative examples that I've seen of this particular concept. Let me see if I can get this lined up correctly for you. Pretty close. All right, I'm going to let you guys just listen to this go through. In case you're wondering, Stockholm's in Sweden. So hopefully that's a good example for you of intrinsic motivation. So you change the environment so that being active is an enjoyable thing as opposed to work. Because oftentimes when in my work with adults trying to be physically active or to lose weight, they've lost the play element out of their lives. It's just all work. They go to work, and of course they work for money. They go home, they take care of the kids, it's work. And then to try to go exercise is work too. So they try to put on some clothes that they don't like. They go to a gym that they don't like. They have to drive and park their car and get there, and then they have to go change and shower. And while they're there, they're lifting weights and doing other awkward movements that don't make any sense to them. Unfortunately, for a lot of people who are not from sport and exercise backgrounds like many of us, the idea of exercise is not very appealing, and so it becomes work. So in this case, I thought it was a good example to show you how it does not have to be like work. And they saw a 66% increase in people using the stairs with that change. Now that was a little bit of an expensive change, but think about how many thousands of people would go through that particular subway station every single day. And so you could, if you apply that on a broader scale, by providing more access to parks, to walking paths right where people are, and making it an enjoyable, fun environment in which they can walk or climb stairs, the public health impact could be huge. So I just wanted to give you an example of that. And if you find any more of those on the internet, if you get your interest piqued, then of course send them my direction. So for this particular unit, we're going to look at what exactly mental health is, look at some definitions that come from your textbook. We're going to look at the two most common mental health issues, which are depression and anxiety, and then how exercise affects both of these issues. And I would be surprised if less than half of you in this class right now have had some issue with depression and anxiety in your life. It's a fairly common concern. We're going to look at the issue of exercise addiction as a positive or a negative thing, and then we're going to talk about factors that will help you find a way to build an exercise prescription or a program, and what it would look like so that you could have good mental health in each case coming from that. Okay, a couple quotes you might just want to check out for a moment and see if you can relate to these. You may have heard the second one, a sound mind and a sound body is a short but full description of a happy state in the world. The reason I think these quotes are interesting is that they're from hundreds of years ago. The William James quote, he's one of the most famous psychologists. He did a lot of work in the early 19th century, or the early 20th century rather. Both of these quotes show the link between physical activity or exercise and mental health. I mean, this is something that has been known for generations and generations, yet it's not very commonly applied. For example, this idea is basically lost in the school curriculum right now. So we just don't think that kids need to be physically active to do well in school, which is craziness. They do absolutely need to play, be physically active, be toned up. They don't need to look and have ripped abs and Hollywood, bodies. Okay, but they just need to be physically active, and it will help them be cheerful and courageous. I mean, those type of, if you had a kid, you certainly would hope they would be cheerful and courageous versus depressed and anxious, which is how we tend to be when we're sedentary. I like the part here in the John Locke quote, it suggests that anyone that has these two things, a sound mind and a sound body, has little more to wish for, and that anyone that wants either of them will be little better for anything else. So if you can simply get yourself to have a sound mind and to have a sound body, and again, we're not talking about Bowflex, ripped abs, Hollywood, bikini stuff. We're just talking about being physically active and fit. Then you basically could have a happy, good quality of life with those things, regardless of what else you have. So I thought it's an interesting perspective to take at the beginning of the lecture. So now that you're a couple weeks into your behavior change, you might think, well, how has your mood been impacted by these changes? Particularly if your behavior change is physical activity related. You might think about that and maybe post that to one of your behavior change journals if you're going to do one this week. Link that to, well, how has your mood been? How has your energy? And look at some of these terms down here. How has your mood changed? The days of, have you used exercise at all to change that? Has your affect been positive or negative on days that you've been able to exercise? And then has it changed any sort of your emotional state? These tend to be linked to other things in our life as opposed to physical activity, but mood and affect can often change. It can, going for a good walk outside with my dog on a nice day can really change from a negative to a positive pretty quickly. Why is this important? Because basically mental health affects everyone, and it can cloud your experience of everything else. So if a person is depressed because they had a breakup with a boyfriend or girlfriend, then that depression may affect school, may affect work, may affect family relationships. It bleeds into everything else. So then, therefore, if exercise can prevent that depression or treat it, then of course it has the potential to alleviate issues or concerns or difficulties across the rest of the areas as well. So you'll need to be familiar with the terminology from your chapters as well. Why do people study this? It's a fairly common issue, so a lot of people will experience some form of psychological disturbance, and as I mentioned earlier, depression and anxiety would be the most common forms of those psychological disturbances. So 20% every 6 months, but only about 20% of those people, you're talking 5% out of 20%, will seek help for that problem. Many of them will simply go to their general practitioner, or they'll go to an emergency clinic, and they will be reporting stress or depression or anxiety, and you can imagine what they get for treatment there. They typically get some sort of medication. So that's why we have a lot of over-medicated individuals, and there's a lot of people on Zoloft and Prozac and all these brand name depression and anxiety medications. So if you think for yourself, in terms of getting treated, there's certainly many more millions getting treated with medication than there are psychotherapy. But what would you see as, sorry about that quick interruption. So have you had a moment to think about what are the drawbacks of the other treatment options? So ignoring exercise for a moment, what is one of the main drawbacks of psychotherapy that you can think of? You might consider that could be a stigma. A lot of people may not want to seek out psychotherapy. They don't understand what it is. So there's a negative perception of that. Access to someone to provide that psychotherapy. And also cost. It's not cheap. On average, about $100 an hour. And if you're in a city, probably $200 an hour. So it's not a cheap option. And you would be going something like once a week for 8 to 12 weeks. For treatment of something of this nature. So that's not cheap at all in terms of a treatment. And what about medication? What would be some of the drawbacks of medication as a treatment option? Another cost is obviously a factor there, depending on what you're taking. Certainly a few dollars a month, up to $50 or $100 a month. How is medication different than psychotherapy? One of the main things that I think about is that medication is a dependence issue. And it's treating only the symptoms of the issues. So whereas psychotherapy, at least, would be hoping to resolve or help you change the way you think or behave so that you're not dependent on psychotherapy for your life. Whereas medication, if you're on depression medication, you may never come off depression medication until something changes. So it creates a dependence. And then, of course, many medications have uncomfortable side effects. I always get a good laugh when I'm watching a U.S. medication commercial on one of these pharmaceutical companies, because it's always a very happy scene, and they're out in the park and they're on the riverboat, and then it's finally revealed that their allergies or their dementia has been prevented by this wonderful drug. But then in very small language, they'll tell you that this drug may cause suicidal thoughts, it may cause lesions in your skin in a small number of patients, and they just kind of glass over those drawbacks, those side effects. So medication has significant side effects. I don't think psychotherapy does. I think you can learn a lot from psychotherapy, whereas medication you don't learn much. You only become dependent on that medication. So we're going to look at exercise and how that may be different, because clearly using exercise to treat this requires a lot more effort than popping a pill every day. So that would be a drawback, but at the same time you're earning your symptom recovery as opposed to just being dependent on something to fix that. In my experience working with a lot of people, how they feel during exercise has a lot to do with whether they return or not. If you have something that you do, that you go out, if you think of one of your favorite physical activities or sports, you probably enjoy it, you feel good at it, that's competence, and you have fun doing it. So why would you not go repeat that activity? You'd be crazy not to. But if you've ever had an experience where you went out and you've had a lot of pain, struggle, frustration, soreness, anxiety, unless there's some reason. You know, if you're an athlete, you think, oh, well, that's just preseason workouts. Well, yeah, that's fine. You're an athlete, you're on scholarship perhaps, or there's some incentive for you because you want to play that sport, you want to start, you've got some goals. But in the real world, if you're 35 working at a job and you go to an exercise facility and you have pain, struggle, frustration, anxiety, you're not coming back. So that's just not how it works outside of the sport context. So that's why I'm suggesting you have to lose your athlete mentality when you work with other people, because and you have to tune into what their experience of being physically active is. And so the goal then is to design something that is not necessarily to make them stronger, faster, and more athletic, but to design something that will help them, yes, that they feel competent, they're getting better, that though is fun and is enjoyable, so that they will repeat it, because we repeat those type of activities. We don't repeat the others, unless we're like, a wrestler in our mentality. In discussion post 6, one of the assignments for this particular unit, you have the opportunity to do your own self-study. There's a great book by a guy named Robert Thayer called Calm Energy, if this is an area and you want to do a little bit more reading in. And it just talks about how simple things like a 10-minute walk, a brisk walk outside on a day like today here in Morgantown, it's a beautiful sunny day, can really change a person's energy level and reduce their tension. And actually, he's compared a lot of just a 10-minute walk to things like a Snickers bar or a soda, other things that students typically go and seek out to get a boost of energy. And he's shown that while both will initially improve energy levels, there's obviously that crash that results from any sort of sugared drink or energy drink or snack, like a sugary snack, where you don't have that from being physically active. So one of the things in my regular classes when I teach this is I do encourage people to be physically active before they study, or to do it during a time period where they need to be prepared mentally for something like an interview or work or a date or something of that nature, to see how does the physical activity prior to that event affect your mood, your energy, your tension, all those kind of things. So you might decide to use exercise strategically in your discussion 6 assignment to see how that goes. So we're going to look at some of the evidence of effectiveness of exercise, but particularly for regular exercise, and we'll differentiate in a few moments. If you're a regularly active person, you're less likely to be depressed, you're less likely to be anxious. You may see some change in your personality characteristics, such as being more optimistic, higher self-esteem. It may actually improve your memory, so it changes how you think. And it may change your neurotic behavior, and that's the one you'd probably want to change. So neurotic behavior is behavior that doesn't necessarily match up with reality. It's also very dysfunctional behavior or compulsive behavior, and also will change worry. So if you're a real worry or pessimistic kind of person, being physically active has the ability to change that, or the potential to change that. In your readings, your extra readings, Leith is an excellent chapter that I do encourage you to check out. And Larry Leith from University of Toronto, talks about this concept of the mental health continuum. And so if you look from the range from A, B to C, basically everyone, including yourself, is somewhere on this continuum from mental illness all the way up to mental health, positive mental health. The bulk of people are average mental health. 7 out of 10 people. Very few people have diagnosed mental illness, and certainly even fewer people have some sort of institutional level mental illness where you might be schizophrenic and you need to be institutionalized because you're a harm to yourself usually, or to others. So that would be less than 5% for sure, probably less than 3%. Most people are average. And then you have a few people that are very resilient personalities that have high mental health, and in times of stress, they actually stay strong. Their boat doesn't rock very much. But for the bulk of us who have average mental health, if the waters are stormy, our boat's shaking. If the waters are calm, we feel good. Okay, that's average mental health. We go and we ride the tides of our lives. If you have mental illness or you're struggling, then the water can be calm and you're rocking your own boat. You're creating your own waves, and you may be struggling with very small waves in the water. Now, so the argument is then that If you have mental illness, for example, maybe you're diagnosed as clinically depressed, exercise can serve as treatment and help return you to the average group. If you already are in average, like many of us, don't have any diagnosed issues, then exercise serves as prevention and helps you move towards mental health. So it's somewhat sort of a buffer. And there's been some research by a guy out in Indiana, John Ragland, that suggests that if you're regularly active, you're just going to see less stress. You're going to experience less stress. So it will just keep you in check, it keeps you in homeostasis, and it may reduce the risk that you become depressed, develop anxiety, or develop some other issue. So it has the potential just to serve as a prevention that, as like a buffer, a buffer to future stress. Regarding treatment, there's been a significant amount of research in this area as well, that physically active people are more stable and healthier than those who are inactive. So both psychologically and physically. It's been used as a form of treatment for depression and anxiety, and we will look at some of those specific guidelines. And walking is probably the most commonly prescribed, and the reason that is in research it's a lot easier to have people do a walking program. It's a lot simpler. You need less people to supervise it and develop programs. So walking is the most common prescription, and because typically people who have mental health issues are not in good physical condition, so you're not going to have them go out and jog probably, and you may not have access to weight training. But some lightweight training and calisthenic type of exercise have been used effectively as well. A couple things will affect whether or not the exercise will help your mental health. So your preferences and enjoyment will help moderate that. So imagine that you absolutely hate running or jogging, okay? And even though we know the research suggests that jogging or running can really help you, be beneficial to improve your fitness, improve your mental health, but for you, it's work, it's torture, it's pain, because you had a coach scream at you for 4 years and to make you run, and so it does not improve your mental health. So there will be some individual variations here. Or like if I put you on a Stairmaster. Like for me, Stairmaster does not improve my mental health. I don't like it. I'll do it to keep my fitness occasionally if I'm at a hotel, and that would be the only option. But I'd sooner walk outside in a crowded street than I would ride a Stairmaster going nowhere. So that would be one of my own personal preferences. I'm going to show you in a minute how exercise is a counter behavior to being depressed or anxious. So it's actually can be a specific form of treatment. It can also be used as a substitute behavior. That's what this is here in treating addiction. So, for example, the person might go out for a walk anytime they're having strong cravings. And it's not particularly walking. If you're not going to go out and do something that you could injure yourself, like heavy weightlifting or sprinting or something else, like you're just going to go out and do some sort of walking or light exercise, it is not a behavior with a lot of drawbacks or side effects. So as opposed to, well, I could substitute my nicotine cravings with drinking. Okay, that could be problematic. I could chew gum. Not so much problematic. That would be an okay substitute behavior. But sometimes when you're treating things like that, you do need a substitute behavior to help get over the addictive part of it. So, regular exercise, as you can see, I mean, this is an exercise psych class, so it's probably no surprise for you that it has a lot of potential, and it's often undersold from the mental health angle. So anytime you see something, you'll say, "Yeah, we need to get our kids fit, and we need to play 60. NFL plays 60, and we need to get out and be active." But it really focuses on we need to get people fit, and let's treat obesity. And yes, that is important, but sometimes losing 50 pounds or helping an obese kid get to where they need to get, that can be a long haul and require substantial effort. So along the way, many of these mental health benefits may actually keep people into it while they're trying to achieve those important physical or outcome goals. So we want to understand a little bit more in depth how these effects occur. So how does exercise work, through what mechanisms, and what are these explanations that can help you be more confident and improve your mental health? So there's several hypotheses that we're going to explore that are outlined in your text, and some of your the Leith reading, I'm sorry, also explore these hypotheses. And so they're just scientific arguments for how does specifically being physically active improve your mental health. The first one many of you will be familiar with, as you may have heard of, the runner's high, suggests that when you're physically active, your body secretes these endorphins, which are natural painkillers, a lot better than your Advils, and it creates a euphoric mood state where you're not feeling pain, so therefore you're less tense, you're more calm. And research in this hypothesis hasn't been very consistent. It suggests that regular exercisers, such as joggers or who are doing a predictable activity all the time, will and can experience this, but usually after 60 to 90 minutes of physical activity. So in terms of the population of people going out to be physically active, it's unlikely that the endorphin hypothesis would explain this effect by itself. It may explain it for some regular runners, why they keep doing it, because it is maybe their drug. It helps them get in check. But in terms of people going out and walking or doing basic physical activity, it's probably not the best explanation. One of the stronger explanations from the scientific community is called the monoamine hypothesis. So monoamines are your neurotransmitters, your major mood regulators, dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, serotonin. And you should check some of this stuff out if you're at all interested in the physiology of psychology. These are the exact same hormones and neurotransmitters that are regulated by pharmacology. So if you have, for example, the one major class of depression medications are called serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SRIs. Serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So basically they go in and they block all these receptacles in your brain so that you have more serotonin free floating in your system, which helps you feel better. And so this hypothesis suggests that exercise positively impacts epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine levels in the body, and then this regular practice of exercise. So imagine you take your drug every day to change these things. So if you're exercising most every day, then you're getting kind of a drug-like regular effect. But you would need to do it most days in order to get that effect. The same thing's true like for red wine. Many of you have heard that red wine or one drink of alcohol, really of any capacity, is good for your heart health. So, but it's not, you can't apply it, you can't take your 7 drinks in one night. Or you have to have your 1 drink a day, 1 to 2 drinks a day if you're a guy, 1 drink if you're a woman, to get those regular benefits. So you couldn't take a drink 3 times a month and hope to get those benefits. So the same would be true here for exercise. You would need to be a regular exercise, and you need to be doing at least a moderate intensity to generate these changes. So there's really strong support for this particular hypothesis. One interactive effect is the idea of warming up the body temperature can relax you. This is kind of like the equivalent of maybe going into a hot tub or something of that nature. So your body warms up, you feel more relaxed, it reduces muscle tension, which helps you sleep. Also, the suggestion is that when you warm your body up, your body temperature increases, which creates like a mini fever, which then allows your body to knock out and kill some of the bacteria in the system. The interaction effect I mentioned, it has to do with when your body is warmed up, there may be increased intake of all these neurotransmitters and monoamines in your system. So body warms up, there's more of them in your system, so physiologically there's an increased uptake in the system, so you're feeling them, the effect of them is more obvious during that time period. So maybe an interactive effect, but probably a little bit too simple by itself. Another reasonably simple explanation that doesn't fly too well is that exercise is just a timeout. So in other words, there's no physiological benefits of exercise from a mental health standpoint. It's just like playing a video game, watching your TV. It's just a timeout. And so the assumption is that life is stressful, relationships are stressful, school is stressful, so that when you go do exercise, you get a break from that stress, which makes you feel better. So it's a fairly simple explanation. I think sometimes that can be true. But probably not for the regular strong effects for treating anxiety and some of these others, because it just looks too much, the outcomes of exercise treatment look too much like the drug studies for it to be purely a psychological. There must be some physiological impact of exercise that's consistent. Yeah, otherwise it wouldn't look so close to pharmaceuticals. A couple others that are useful to consider. One that's more of a big picture model is that called the opponent process. So this is like an A-B stimulus model. So every time you go exercise, you're becoming tense, you're becoming fatigued, you're creating one process in your body. So you're inducing your body into a state of somewhat of discomfort, of struggle, and then your body in its natural wisdom returns to homeostasis after that by recovering and helping you relax, reducing tension, and producing energy, which is the opponent to that particular process. So it's almost like a yin to a yang, that your homeostasis is going to return you to that. So if you continue to repeat that, then you will regularly, your body will return yourself to homeostasis. So it's kind of the big picture of it, and I totally agree with that in terms of exercise, going out and doing something that's difficult or challenging to the body that breaks the muscles down will then cause the body to return in a stronger state that is less tense, more energetic, and kind of more outgoing. Another simple psychological explanation is self-efficacy. So the perception, this is probably another interactive one, that you just feel more competent. And so because you're feeling more competent and efficacious, then you feel less neurotic. You may change your personality in some way if you applied this over the course of months and years. So not in a single session, but over a significant amount of time. So hopefully those hypotheses make some sense. Monoamine hypothesis is probably the strongest, but many of them contribute to some way and help us understand why exercise may impact a person's mental health in a positive way. So let's get more specific now in terms of understanding depression and anxiety and how exercise interacts with these. All of us have or will have already, may already have, or will experience some form of non-clinical depression. So this is just you're down, you're sad, you're tearful, you're feeling a little bit hopeless, but maybe it only lasts a couple days or a week because something happened, you lost a job, there was a breakup, you're homesick. But it's not a consistent everyday type of thing. It's not overwhelming, and it doesn't last for more than a week or two. Clinical depression is typically a minimum of 2 weeks, pretty much every day, where you're not yourself. You're very depressed every day. You're down. You don't have a lot of energy. And we're going to look at some of the key features of clinical depression and why exercise matches up well with that. On the flip side, anxiety, and these two can go together, can be cognitive or physiological or both. So nervousness, jittery, worry is the cognitive part of it, a lot of negative thoughts, pessimistic thoughts. The most severe form of anxiety is a panic attack, and that is a very physiological experience where the person eventually passes out because they can't breathe. They become so anxious and focused internally that they get so constricted, their body just shuts down eventually. So it's a very severe form of anxiety. It's not as common, but certainly many people do suffer from panic attacks. Okay, so those are the descriptions, and let's have a look at depression specifically. Exercise does show good effects with both clinical and non-clinical, and it's been shown to be most effective as an adjunctive treatment. That means in addition to individual or group therapy. So if you think about this, it would be almost like the combination of medication plus therapy. So the medication would help you with the symptoms while you figured out how to learn some new skills or get some sort of insight that would resolve the issue. Same with exercise. So exercise serves the physiological, changes your physiology, and of course helps you feel more competent and become a stronger person while you're going to therapy potentially to deal with the grief or deal with the relationship or deal with whatever particular issue, and getting an opportunity to discuss and talk about the causes of the depression. So the combination of two is a strong match. So let's have a look exactly how this works. So here are some of the hallmark features of depression, and those are the larger text. So depressed mood, sleep problems, low energy, poor concentration, and being sedentary. It's really a great word, psychomotor retardation. I encourage you all to use that in your regular living. It'll make you sound really smart and impress your parents. So depressed mood specifically, we've already shown, you can have acute and chronic exercise will have an impact, and we're going to look at those state and trait effects. Hopefully you guys remember your state and trait stuff from your SEP 272 courses. Sleep, regular exercise has been shown to improve the quality and ease of falling asleep, particularly when that exercise is done at a regular interval, usually in the afternoon or evening, so usually between 4 to 7 p.m. for most people. If you're a regular kind of after work or after school exerciser, it then helps you establish a pattern of going to sleep later on at night, unless you're going on drinking a lot of caffeine at night. It does improve your metabolic function. It builds lean muscle mass, which means you burn more calories at sleep, so it literally does crank you up. And if you're fit or if you're lifting weights or whatever, you're going to have more base metabolic rate, burning more calories at rest than those people who are unfit. It affects your cognitive functioning and your alertness. And one of the hallmark features of depression is that you don't feel like doing much. You're sedentary, you're not interested in things. So it's literally the complete opposite of being depressed. So if you can get the person to simply get off the couch, get off their bed, and go for a walk, they will begin to treat their own depression immediately because they would not classify. So if a person is regularly active, let's say exercising 30 minutes a day for 5 days a week, they cannot be and they cannot meet the diagnosis for clinical depression. You would not be able to meet it. So it is pretty much the antithesis of, the complete opposite of depression, being regularly active. On the flip side, let's turn to anxiety disorders. One of the most common issues in sports psych for sure. And anxiety here, kind of let's blend this together with stress problems. So stress would be, a stress-related issue would be tuned as anxiety, because typically stress is I'm worried about something. So that's anxiety would be the general term here. But there's differential effects for how exercise affects state and trait anxiety. So hopefully you remember this from your previous classes. If not, state anxiety is your feeling of anxiety right now, today, in this moment. Your trait anxiety is in general how anxious are you? Are you a worrier? Are you calm? So for state anxiety, there's a pretty predictable effect. If you go out and you exercise, you go for a walk for 20 to 30 minutes, do some sort of predictable, repeatable exercise, you're going to have a calming, an improvement in mood that's going to last somewhere between 2 to 4 hours, maybe even 6 hours if you go out and do something, as long as you haven't overdone it. Aerobic, rhythmic activities induce this effect, and non-aerobic activities do not. Okay, so if you're hoping to go out and feel less anxious, and one thing I always encourage students to do is, let's say you have a big interview coming up or a big exam. Let's take the example of, let's say the exam's at 1 o'clock or the interview's at 1 o'clock. What you might want to do is late morning, maybe 10 or 11 if you have time, depending on where you need to go, you might want to go out and have your exercise around that time, and then have a light lunch or something after that, so that you're now calming yourself down, getting some of that energy out, and then you might actually feel better when you're going through that test or that interview, and you can use exercise as a means to prevent that stress that's occurring. But it should be something that's walking, very predictable, biking, on the elliptical, something that's very closed environment, so that you can control it and you can do it at a pace that doesn't overdo it. Okay. On the trait anxiety side, it takes at least 10, 12 weeks to reduce or change a person's personality. And again, rhythmic activities are recommended in this case, but you don't need to be more fit. You don't need to be more fit to get the effect. So it's really just the repetition of that, going through the exercise program. And these are typically only 3 days a week, so these really aren't even people meeting physical activity guidelines. They are, they're just going out and doing the repetition of being physically active over time. Now, on the flip side of that, in comparison to other maybe sports psych type of treatments, excuse me, a little technical difficulties for a moment. Back, okay. Exercise is basically the same effect as relaxation, meditation, any sort of stress management that way, or hypnosis. So it's just as good as other purely psychological treatments, but these psychological treatments that you would use to treat anxiety, relaxation training, breathing, for example, progressive muscle relaxation, they're not going to have the physical benefits, the physiological changes, as significant as physical activity will be. Okay, so the upside of physical activity is you might get actually psychological changes as well as physiological changes. Now, can you overdo it? Is it possible to be addicted to exercise? Yes, somewhat. You know, there's a guy named Glasser that had done quite a bit of research on exercise as positive addiction. I bet he even wrote the book of the same title, Positive Addiction. And his suggestion is that it can be a positive thing if these criteria are met. You can do the activity by itself. It's a non-competitive thing, and you're not getting critical of yourself. You can do it for at least an hour a day. It maintains some value to you as a participant. And it results primarily in positive mood changes. In other words, it's not making you more depressed, mad, frustrated, angry. This would be a positive addiction. Okay, that you can meet these criteria. Now, on the flip side of that, it can turn into a negative experience if you can't be removed from it. So you can develop, basically one of the key features of any addiction is a dependence on that particular substance or activity. Where if you miss a day or two, it's really going to disrupt your mood and it's going to throw you out of whack. So that addiction then starts to undermine other areas of your life. If it's a positive addiction, it does not have any negative influences throughout your life. If it's a negative addiction, then you'll have withdrawal. There's an all or none feature that it must be done for a certain amount of time. There may be underlying psychological issues related to body image, self-esteem, and it certainly would lead people potentially towards overtraining, injuries, or burnout, staleness. And so the features that turn it into a negative addiction are an inability to adjust the idea of I must do it for a certain amount of time. So it's very much all or none type of thinking, which is a hallmark feature of mental illness. And then also there would be withdrawal symptoms that are associated with that activity. So I'm not talking about, many of us who are regularly active, if you miss a couple of days, you might not like it, but it's not going to disrupt you really and distract your attention at work or cause you to be in a really grumpy mood with your boyfriend or girlfriend. So, but if you have a negative addiction, it would disrupt you that much, and it would almost take precedence over any other activity in your life. So like if you have an alcoholic that in your family or you're working with, and probably about 1 in 4 or 5 of us does, the alcohol, the fact that they will need to drink alcohol actually takes precedence over every single thing in life. So the priority being placed over family, over work, it becomes the number one issue, and that's the key issue here. So if physical activity is an addiction in a negative way, it will start to overtake other life priorities that seem like they may be more important, such as working, paying your bills, and your marriage or some of those other issues. Okay, and you might also remember this from your 272 class if you got to check out this model. This is Silva's overtraining model, and someone with a negative addiction would be heading towards burnout in this area. Okay, so all athletes need to experience overtraining so that they can compensate and get faster, get stronger. If you go through a significant period of this without rest, you will proceed into staleness, which is a period of slumped performance where you're not getting any better. Okay, but this is you can recover from with a few days off, a week off. If you push hard through staleness and you continue to hammer on this, a coach is screaming at you, or you are negatively addicted, you'll eventually end up in burnout through injury. Typically for folks who are runners or other sort of addictive athletes, they just end up being injured and burn out at the end of that phase. So ideally you want to go from staleness back into overtraining through rest, because by the time you get to burnout, you're cooked and you need months and months off. So kind of to summarize, we're going to start creating your ideal prescription here. Some of the factors you want to consider that, and this is not for fitness. Okay, remember we're talking about exercise psychology now, so let's even emphasize that. To achieve regular stress management benefits, improve your mood, Here's what the research suggests. First thing the research suggests is that you have an enjoyable activity that you chose, something that you prefer. The activity itself should be one that's rhythmic, does not involve competition, is predictable, and it's repetitive. So, like for example, one of my favorite activities would be playing basketball. However, if I go out and play a pickup game at the rec center, it's a very unpredictable activity. I might end up in there with a couple goons who want to fight, who knock me over, who give me elbows, who are calling lousy fouls, and that's really going to disrupt my experience and may cause me to be in a worse mood. So maybe if basketball is my activity, then I might get into some sort of repetitive or rhythmic shooting exercise where I go out and shoot the ball, I'm by myself, I rebound for myself, I jog around, I shoot. That would meet the mode requirements because it's rhythmic, get you into an aerobic state of mind. Okay, in terms of the frequency, intensity, and duration down here at the bottom, it should be at least 3 times a week. Moderate intensity, not high, because oftentimes high intensity will lead to more fatigue and negative mood, whereas low to moderate intensity exercise typically results in a positive mood state. And the duration should be shorter, maybe 20 to 40 minutes, something that just kind of gets you going but is not going to exhaust you. Now, obviously, if you're in training for a marathon, it's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a regular person who wants to go out and get some stress out of their lives. They should go out and do something they like, that's rhythmic, and do it for about a half hour. So the simplest thing you could do if you're not an athlete, you don't like any sport, is go for a walk for about go walk 1.5 miles. Okay, in an environment that you like. That would probably be the simplest. And that's certainly one of mine. I love going down to the rail trail with my dog by myself and just go out there for a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour. That's a particularly enjoyable activity for me because it's a location that I like. It's very predictable. I control the pace. If I want to jog, I can. If I want to walk, I can. And it almost always results in a positive mood change for me. So in creating that ideal prescription, if you were maybe to list this out for yourself, you might take a couple moments and think about what that would be. And if you want to post that to your discussion 6 assignment, that would be useful as well. I didn't require that, but that's something you might think about, is what would be your choice of exercise? And you might list a couple options. Here are my favorite things, and the one I might choose to be my go-to would be this and why. How does that meet your personality? How doesn't it? What kind of previous experience do you have with that particular activity? Does it need to be a sport type of activity based on your athletic identity? And in terms of the situation, you really want to then identify the mode, which we talked about, which is the type of exercise. How often would you do it? And so the recommendations are at least 3 times a week. How intense would it be? Light or moderate only? How long? And then where would it be? So you might take a few moments and say, I think next time I'm stressed, here's where I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to the rail trail and really remember that, because this is something that you guys can control and develop for yourself that is not a drug, costs no money, and could be your answer to changing your stress. Because sometimes we get very frustrated that our lives are stressed, we're feeling down, we're feeling depressed, but oftentimes we don't take control over the situation to help us do something about it. We just kind of like to complain about it. So this is one area where you can really just create this, and then it becomes a go-to thing, like, hey, I need to get out and go do something, as opposed to sit and think about something, which oftentimes doesn't help the situation. So going out and doing something positive, being physically active, might allow you to take control and also to do something that you like before, after some sort of stressful event that has occurred in your life. So in summary, kind of to wrap things up, one of the key points, or a couple key points I want to emphasize is, think for yourself. A lot of times people get into physical activity to lose weight, to be more fit, to get something physical, to get off my blood pressure medication, to prevent my heart disease. But the reason that people stay, and if you read the Kamichik article that I assigned you that's online, The Intrinsic Exerciser, he talks a lot about the difference between why people start and why people maintain. And they typically start for extrinsic reasons, which is fine to be extrinsically motivated, but they stay physically active for intrinsic reasons. And so many of these intrinsic reasons are the mental health benefits people get from exercise. Stress management, improve mood, improve energy for being with the kids. These are the reasons people go out and regularly do it. They like it, it's enjoyable, it makes them feel better. Not, I'm losing weight, I'm skinnier, those type of things. They are part of the motivation package, but as you get older, many of you will find that the mental health benefits at least equal or outweigh the physical benefits to exercise. So hopefully the unit was useful for you and you had a good feel for it. Don't forget to do the reading quiz in this unit. So you have a discussion assignment. Your interview assignment is due in this unit. I haven't talked a lot about it in this podcast, but because I did in the previous lecture. Make sure you use the appropriate interview questions. You should have already completed that by now, hopefully. And follow the instructions for writing up the paper. I do not want to see a transcript for your interview. If you have questions about that, certainly drop me an email, and I look forward to chatting with you over the summer. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.